So I've said this kind of thing before, and I'll say it again. Uh, Capitalism was an evolution from feudalism. So feudalism is where the most brutal person in the culture is the dominant player. And if we look back in history, it's the alpha person, typically an alpha male, but there's certainly examples of alpha females who are in charge of the feudal cultures, and that the kings and the nobility, they control the money supply, they control the economy, and there's usually really a huge gulf between the ruling class and the the serfs, basically the working class, you could say. Um, so capitalism was an evolution. There was a growing merchant class, so they were wealthy. They weren't kings. They didn't get their power as directly through violence. There's a often though symbiotic relationship between the merchants and the ruling class when it comes to the military. And part of the agreement like that is that a strong military allows the commerce to function without each individual merchant having to create their own standing army. So, really in feudalism, what you're looking at is that each small or nobility has their own army, and that creates very difficult cultures when the powerful people are fighting with each other with violence. And perhaps the main American innovation, the conscious innovation of the United States in its formation, was to create a governmental system and this agreement amongst the elite to settle their disagreements in in the halls of government as opposed to in a feudal way. And so that simple agreement allowed for a much lower level of the ruling class each having their own standing army. And you can imagine, so if they're all working together and they have this sort of agreement that they're going to settle their disagreements in court rather than through violence, that allowed for great economic growth because basically preparing for war and executing war is very costly. So those costs were shared. You could say the U.S. has a socialized military system, and that benefited the growth of wealth in the United States. And that's really what's allowed the U.S. currency to become still the dominant currency in the world. And so these are really important concepts. And so there was a kind of a freedom that came from capitalism, the power sharing agreement. And we're going to look a little bit more closely at what happened in the early part of the last century, because there's law and then there's money, and the merchant class wants to have a stable money supply. And when politicians run the money supply, they have a tendency to want to manipulate it for their own power. And so this battle, or shall we say struggle, between those two kind of competing value sets, and you might even call it kind of a life archetype, the business person and the power seeker, that led to in the United States, the Federal Reserve Bank. So we're going to talk about that in the next topic.